This isn't something you need to follow closely. The observable universe has a size, about 93 billion light-years from one edge to the other. This seems like it might be everything. It's what appears anyway, what shows up in measurements. The rest, the part beyond what can be seen, that could be vastly larger, immeasurably so. The observable universe is what the name suggests. Everything that can be observed from here, everything whose light managed to complete the journey, given enough time and the right conditions. It's a sphere, in a sense, with Earth somewhere near the center, containing every galaxy, every star, every structure that sends light that eventually arrives. And for a long time, maybe it seemed reasonable to assume this was simply the universe, that what appears is what exists. Except the observable universe isn't limited by what exists out there. It's limited by what can reach here. The boundary isn't where the universe ends. It's where light stops being able to cross the distance, where the expansion of space itself creates a threshold that light can't overcome. So the 93 billion light-years, that number describes visibility, not totality. The universe you can see is just a small region within something potentially much larger. The sphere of observation sits inside a cosmos that might extend far beyond it, maybe infinitely. The farther something is, the longer light takes to arrive, and this seems to hold for everything. Satellites farther out, their signals take minutes. Distant stars need larger mirrors to collect enough light. The process scales up with distance in a way that feels reliable, dependable even, something you can build expectations around. Except there are places where light has already left, already started traveling in this direction, and it's never going to arrive here. The light keeps moving, still crossing space at whatever speed light moves. Around 300,000 kilometers each second, which stays constant. The light itself continues forward, the way it always does. It's just that the gap it's trying to cross grows faster than the light can close it. So the journey continues, without completing, without ever reaching the point where it becomes visible from here. And maybe while you're here, resting wherever you are, allowing this thought to unfold without needing to hold on to every detail. It's worth acknowledging that some people leave a small note when they begin, a quiet mark of presence, while others listen without leaving anything, and both seem equally fine. The thought continues. Either way, this happens because space itself expands, and the object stays where it is, in a sense. Or rather, it's carried along as the space around it stretches uniformly, and over large enough distances that stretching accumulates into something significant. Something that affects whether light can cross from there to here. The light still travels forward, persistent, covering ground. The distance between the photon and its starting point keeps increasing. It's just that the destination recedes faster than the light approaches. So arrival becomes, it becomes impossible in a way that waiting doesn't fix, in a way that better instruments don't address. There are galaxies that have been emitting light toward Earth for billions of years, and that light is still traveling, still making its way through space. And it will never get here. The expansion rate between here and there exceeds the speed the light can make progress at, and the photons continue forward. Maybe unaware is the wrong word. They just persist in moving the way light moves, through a space that grows too quickly for the crossing to ever finish. This is already true, already operating, has been for longer than humans have existed. There are regions of space where light departed long ago and has been traveling all this time, covering immense distances, moving through the vacuum at the only speed it can move. and the journey will never complete. The light continues through expanding space, the way water continues flowing, even when the river widens. The process persists without resolution, without the arrival that would make it visible. What this produces is a boundary. Or maybe boundary isn't quite right, because it's not something you could approach or touch. It's more like a horizon built into the expansion rate itself. Somewhere around 16 billion light years from here, maybe 18. The exact number matters less than what it represents. Beyond that distance, things recede faster than light travels. The universe might extend infinitely past that point. There's no way to know. The light from those regions can't cross into visibility, regardless of how much time passes or how sensitive the instruments become. So, the observable universe, the 93 billion light-year sphere, that's everything whose light can complete the journey here. Everything within a distance where expansion hasn't yet surpassed the speed of light. The rest remains out of view, permanently separated by a limitation that was there before anyone measured it, and continues operating right now. While you're sitting here in the quiet, the same process that prevents distant light from arriving, functioning the same way it always has. Indifferent to whether attention is paid or the room stays still. And the thought is, allowed to continue past any particular ending point. The idea that waiting eventually produces visibility. That distance is just a matter of patience and better tools. This works for most things. You point a telescope at something faint, gather light for hours or days, and eventually the object appears. The delay is real, the difficulty is real, but the arrival happens. A signal from a distant spacecraft takes minutes or hours to return, and you wait, and it arrives. The waiting resolves into information, into confirmation that the message completed its journey. This is reliable enough that it becomes part of how you expect the universe to behave, part of how distance feels. Challenging, sometimes frustrating, requiring effort and time, but ultimately crucible. The farther something is, the longer everything takes. But the process itself stays intact. Light leaves, travels through space, arrives. The mechanism holds. Except there are places where light has been traveling for billions of years, heading in this direction, and it's still traveling now. Still moving through space the way light always moves, and it will never arrive here. The journey continues without completing, without ever reaching the point where it becomes visible, where it crosses into the observable sphere. And maybe this is a good moment to acknowledge something. If this kind of quiet exploration is helpful, if these long-form thoughts create space for rest or reflection, supporting the channel simply allows it to continue. There's no urgency, no requirement, just a quiet option for those who find value in this approach. It's a bit like waiting for something that should eventually show up. A letter maybe, or a response. Something that departed a long time ago and should have arrived by now, given how much time has passed. And you keep waiting, because waiting has always worked before, because patience has always been enough. The waiting continues, and the thing you're waiting for, that continues traveling toward you. Covering distance, making progress in its own way. It's just that the destination keeps receding, pulled back by something that has nothing to do with the speed of travel itself. So the gap between the thing traveling and the place it's trying to reach. That gap grows rather than shrinks, and arrival stops being something that time can resolve. The light from those distant galaxies, it left billions of years ago, when the universe was younger, denser, when distances were smaller. And in that earlier time, the light started moving, crossing space at the speed it always crosses space, and it's been traveling all this time, continuously, without stopping or slowing. The distance between the light and its starting point has grown immensely. The photons are billions of light years away from where they began, which seems like progress, like the journey is advancing. And it is advancing. In a sense, the light keeps moving forward through space, keeps covering ground. It's just that Earth, the destination, has moved even farther during that same time, carried along by the expansion of space itself, so the distance between the light and Earth. Despite the light's constant motion, despite billions of years of travel, that distance has actually increased. The light has been moving toward a destination that's been moving away faster, and the gap between them, instead of closing, has widened. So the light continues traveling, persistent in a way, covering immense distances, and yet it doesn't get closer to the place it's trying to reach. This seems strange, maybe, or contradictory. How can something be moving forward and not getting closer? But it's less about the light's motion and more about what's happening to the space the light is moving through. The way that space stretches uniformly everywhere, and over large enough distances, that stretching accumulates into something significant, something that affects whether crossing is possible at all. At smaller distances, a few million light years, the expansion is there, technically operating. But light crosses faster than the space grows, so the journey completes. Andromeda's light reaches here in about 2.5 million years, which is a long time, but the arrival happens. The waiting works. At larger distances, though tens of billions of light years, the same expansion rate, applied over that much greater distance, accumulates into something faster than light travels. And that's where crossing stops being possible, where the journey continues, indefinitely, without arrival. And while you're here, resting wherever you are, allowing this thought to continue without needing to grasp every detail, the same process operates, the same expansion that prevents certain light from arriving, functioning whether or not attention stays with the idea, whether the room is quiet and time passes and the thought is allowed to settle without needing to resolve into anything specific or complete. Light travels. It's been traveling for billions of years, in some cases, moving at the only speed it can move, 300,000 kilometers every second, constant, unchanging. That's fast enough to circle Earth 7.5 times in a single second. Fast enough to cross the distance from here to the moon in just over a second. Fast enough that at human scales, at planetary scales, even at solar system scales, light speed feels almost instantaneous. A delay so brief it barely registers. The light from these distant galaxies has been traveling at that speed for longer than Earth has existed, longer than the solar system has existed, moving continuously through space without pause, without slowing, without stopping. Billions of years of continuous motion. The distance covered is immense. Billions of light years separate these photons from their starting point. A gap so large it's difficult to hold in mind, difficult to compare to anything familiar, and that seems like progress. Distance covered, separation from origin, billions of light years of space traversed. The motion persists, the journey continues, and there's a sense that traveling for that long, covering that much distance, should eventually produce arrival, should eventually close the gap to whatever destination the light is aimed at. The destination, though, Earth, in this case, the place the light is trying to reach. That's also been moving, or rather, the space between the light and Earth has been growing, expanding uniformly the way space expands everywhere, And over the billions of years, the light has been traveling. That expansion has pushed Earth farther away, receding faster than the light can approach. So the light continues forward, covering ground, making real, measurable progress away from its origin. And the gap to Earth grows larger, not smaller. This is motion without approach. Or maybe approach isn't quite the right word, because approach usually implies getting closer. And that's not happening here. The motion is real. The speed is real. The distance covered is real. It's just that the distance remaining, the gap still to be crossed, that increases rather than decreases. So the journey continues. The effort persists. Billions of years of continuous travel and arrival stops being something the motion produces. And while you're here, resting, letting this thought continue at whatever pace it continues. There's no need to hold on to every detail, no need for the idea to lead somewhere, specific or resolve into something complete. Persistence doesn't resolve this. Traveling longer doesn't help. The light has been traveling for timescales that dwarf human history, dwarf recorded civilization, dwarf the existence of complex life on Earth, and the additional time, the additional billions of years of motion, that doesn't bring the destination closer, doesn't reduce the distance remaining. The journey just extends, continues, perpetuates, without conclusion. You could imagine accelerating, going faster, covering more distance per second. Except light is already traveling at the maximum possible speed, the upper limit built into how space and time relate to each other. And even at that maximum speed, even with billions of years to work with, the approach doesn't happen. The speed ceiling has already been reached. The motion is already as fast as motion can be. And the crossing still doesn't complete. There's something persistent about light, about the way photons just continue moving, regardless of whether the destination is reachable, regardless of whether the geometry allows arrival. They don't slow down, don't turn back, don't stop trying in any meaningful sense. They just persist in traveling the way light travels. Forward through space, indifferent to whether the space is expanding faster than they can cross it. Indifferent to whether arrival is possible. The distance behind them grows. The starting point recedes into the past. Billions of light years away now, impossibly far, separated by a gulf that continues widening. That part works the way travel is supposed to work. The farther you go, the more distance appears between you and where you started. But the distance ahead, to the destination, that also grows, expanding continuously and the motion forward. No matter how persistent, no matter how fast, no matter how long, it continues. That motion doesn't reduce the gap ahead, doesn't bring the destination into closer range. So there's this situation where light covers immense distances, measurable, real distances, traveling across billions of light years of space, making genuine progress in terms of separation from origin. And yet the destination remains out of reach, always receding, always farther than it was moments before. And the travel continues through this expanding space. Motion that persists without producing the arrival that motion usually produces. Effort that continues without the completion that effort is meant to achieve. Billions of years is a long time to travel without arriving. Long enough that galaxies form and evolve. Long enough that stars complete their entire life cycles. Long enough that planets form and cool and develop atmospheres. The photons have been traveling through all of that, through billions of years of cosmic history, moving at maximum speed, covering distance that should be more than sufficient to cross any gap. And the gap to Earth, to the destination. that hasn't closed, hasn't reduced, has actually grown larger throughout all that time, all that motion, all that persistence. And this isn't something temporary, isn't a delay that eventually resolves, a slowdown that eventually catches up. The geometry itself prevents arrival. The expansion of space creates a situation where certain destinations become permanently unreachable, regardless of speed, regardless of time spent traveling, regardless of how persistent the motion remains. The light continues, the journey persists. Distance keeps being covered, and arrival keeps being something the motion can't produce, something the geometry prevents, something that remains forever deferred, despite continuous effort at maximum speed. Across cosmic timescales, the photons themselves, they just move the way light moves. At the speed light moves, through whatever space exists around them. There's no awareness of success or failure, no recognition that the destination is unreachable, no decision to continue or stop, just motion, continuous forward motion through space, regardless of whether that space is expanding faster than the motion can overcome, regardless of whether the journey will ever complete. There's a delay between sending something and receiving confirmation that it arrived. A message, a signal, light itself. Anything transmitted across distance takes time to cross that distance, and then more time for any response to return. At familiar scales, this delay barely registers. A phone call, even across continents, feels almost instantaneous. Maybe a fraction of a second lag that's hardly noticeable. The waiting is brief enough that it doesn't feel like waiting at all. At larger distances, the delay becomes something you notice, something you plan around. A spacecraft orbiting Mars, commands sent from Earth take anywhere from 4 to 24 minutes to arrive, depending on where Mars is in its orbit, and then another 4 to 24 minutes for confirmation to return. So you send an instruction, and you wait. And the waiting has a known duration, a calculable endpoint. 48 minutes maximum. You can set a timer, check back later, and when the time has passed, the confirmation is there. The signal has returned. The loop is complete. The waiting works. It's tedious maybe, requires patience, stretches longer than you'd prefer, but the mechanism holds. You send, you wait the appropriate duration, you receive. The delay is predictable. Prediction makes waiting bearable, makes it feel temporary. Something that will eventually resolve into information, into confirmation that the message completed its journey. And while you're sitting here, in whatever quiet space you're in, letting time pass as this thought continues, there's no requirement for the idea to resolve. No need for it to lead somewhere specific. Beyond a certain distance, though, the confirmation stops returning. You could send a signal toward a galaxy beyond the cosmic horizon. Aim it precisely. Encode whatever information you want to transmit. And the signal would leave, would travel outward at light speed, crossing space the way all signals cross space. And you'd wait. The signal is traveling at 300,000 kilometers per second. The maximum speed anything can travel, so the delay should be calculable. Send time plus travel time plus return time. The math is straightforward, except the return doesn't happen. Days pass, then weeks, then years, and no confirmation arrives. You might wait longer, thinking maybe the calculation was wrong. Maybe the distance was farther than estimated. Maybe there's some delay you didn't account for, so you keep waiting. More time passes, decades, centuries. The waiting extends far beyond any reasonable estimate of how long the signal should take, far beyond any margin of error in the calculation. And at some point, the waiting stops, feeling like waiting, it becomes something else. Not anticipation of a response, more like acknowledgement of absence. The signal isn't delayed. The response isn't coming late. The return journey, the crossing back from destination to origin, that can't happen. The space the return signal would need to traverse expands faster than the signal can cross it. So the reply, the confirmation, that remains perpetually out of reach, unable to complete the journey back. At closer distances, waiting accumulates into resolution. You send a probe to Saturn, wait over an hour, and the confirmation returns. The time spent waiting was frustrating, maybe longer than you'd prefer. But it built toward something, toward knowledge that the command arrived, toward verification that the communication succeeded. The waiting had purpose, had an endpoint, had a payoff. Here, the time spent waiting just accumulates into more waiting. The hours become days, days become years, years become lifetimes, and the signal still hasn't returned. Waiting doesn't build toward anything. It extends without approaching resolution, without getting closer to the moment when confirmation arrives. The duration grows, the patience persists, and the response remains absent. Not because it's taking longer than expected, just because the geometry prevents the return entirely. There's light that left distant galaxies billions of years ago, aimed in Earth's direction, traveling continuously at light speed. If that light could somehow carry information, if someone at the source tried to communicate with Earth by encoding a message in those photons, the message would still be traveling now, still moving through space, still covering distance. And someone here, if they were waiting for that message, if they'd been waiting since the moment it was sent, they'd still be waiting. Billions of years of waiting, longer than Earth has existed, longer than the Sun has existed, longer than most structures in the universe have persisted, and the message wouldn't have arrived, wouldn't be close to arriving, would actually be farther from Earth now than when it started, despite billions of years of continuous travel at maximum speed. Because the space between the message and Earth has been growing faster than the message can traverse it. So, the waiting continues, extends across timescales that dwarf anything familiar. And the arrival, the moment when the waiting ends and the message completes its journey, that remains permanently deferred. If you tried to send a reply, a response, back toward the source of that original message, your reply would face the same barrier. It would travel outward at light speed, and it would never arrive. The sender would wait, just as you waited, and the response would never come. And their waiting would extend indefinitely, just as yours did. And the communication loop, the basic back and forth, that makes waiting functional at closer distances, that breaks down entirely. So there's this situation where signals continue being sent, continue traveling through space, and the waiting for responses continues extending. And the responses remain absent, and the waiting stops being a temporary state that patience can resolve. Stops being a delay with a calculable endpoint, becomes instead a permanent condition, an ongoing absence that persists. Regardless of how much additional time passes, you could wait forever, literally, across all future time, across the entire remaining duration of cosmic history, and certain signals would never return. The waiting would continue throughout all of that, and the confirmation would remain absent throughout all of that, and the response would never cross back into the observable region where the waiting occurs. The signal travels, the waiting extends, and the return, the completion, the moment when waiting ends. That stays out of reach, unreachable through any duration of patience, through any amount of time spent hoping the response will eventually arrive. And while time passes here, where you're resting, the same absence continues. The same signals traveling without arriving, the same waiting extending without resolving, functioning the same way regardless of whether attention is paid to it, whether the thought continues or drifts elsewhere, whether the room stays quiet and the moment extends without needing to become something else. There are regions of space that exist without any connection to here. Connection might not be quite right. They exist, they're there, somewhere far beyond the observable horizon. Structures and galaxies, continuing their processes, but there's no exchange between them and this location. No light crosses, no information transfers. No influence of any kind passes from there to here or from here to there. The gap between them and here is permanent, complete, total, in a way that's difficult to find comparison for. Islands can be reached, given enough effort or the right conditions. Distant places can eventually be visited, given enough time or improved technology. The barrier is practical, circumstantial, something that might change. This doesn't change. The space between grows, the expansion continues, and the regions drift farther into isolation, farther from any possibility of contact, farther from any chance that light or information could ever cross from one to the other. The drift is slow, continuous, indifferent to what occurs within either region. And while you're here, resting, time passing quietly, there's no need for this thought to lead anywhere. Whatever happens in those distant regions, whatever processes occur, whatever structures form or disperse, all of that unfolds without any observable trace reaching here. Stars form there, or they don't. Galaxies collide there, or they remain separate. The activity continues. The changes accumulate, and none of it produces any signal that crosses into the observable sphere. Centered here, the events occur in complete absence of any record, any verification, any confirmation that would allow awareness of them. The silence is total. Maybe silence isn't the right word. There's no sound traveling through space, regardless of distance. Vacuum doesn't carry sound. It's more like the absence of any possible exchange, any possible awareness. The regions exist in mutual unknowability, each continuing independently, neither able to interact with, or influence, or exchange anything with the other. Galaxies beyond the horizon have been radiating light continuously for billions of years. That light travels outward in all directions, including the direction that points toward where Earth is now. The photons move through space, persistent, covering immense distances over immense timescales. And none of that light, none of those billions of years of continuous radiation, none of it crosses into visibility from here. The emission continues, the isolation continues, and the connection, the interaction, the exchange that would create awareness that remains absent. There's no waiting that resolves this, no patience that eventually produces contact, no duration long enough for the crossing to occur. The separation persists across all time, across the entire past and future history of both regions, unchanged by anything that happens within them, unaffected by whatever processes occur or cease to occur. If something exists there, some structure or system or whatever might be present in those regions, it exists within its own observable sphere, containing everything that can send light there, everything that can interact with that location. And that sphere is separate from the one centered here. The two don't overlap at the edges. They're distinct, isolated, existing side by side, without any shared region, without any common ground where interaction could occur. So their observable universe contains things that aren't in the observable universe here. And the observable universe here contains things that aren't in theirs. The two spheres exist in complete isolation from each other, unable to exchange information that would allow comparison or verification or any kind of mutual awareness. This has been operating since the universe expanded beyond a certain size. Since the rate of expansion created boundaries that separate regions permanently. The isolation isn't new, isn't temporary, isn't something that might change if conditions shift. It's built into the geometry, into the structure of how expansion works over cosmic distances. The regions continue existing, the processes continue operating. Stars form, galaxies evolve. Structures grow or disperse, all of it occurring in complete isolation, in complete absence of any interaction with the observable universe centered here. The activity persists. The separation persists, and the exchange, the connection, the interaction that would create mutual awareness, that remains impossible, prevented by the geometry itself. By the rate at which space expands between locations, separated by such distances, while you're sitting here, time passing, the room quiet around you. The same isolation continues, the same regions existing without any connection to here, the same absence of exchange, the same silence between locations that can't interact. Functioning the same way regardless of whether attention stays with this thought or drifts elsewhere. Whether the moment continues or settles into something else. Whether the room remains still and time passes without anything needing to change or resolve or conclude. The galaxies at the edge of the observable universe, the ones sitting at the farthest distances, that still send light here. That light barely made it. It traveled for billions of years, crossing immense distances, and it arrived, but just barely. A bit farther out, a bit more distance, and the light wouldn't have completed the journey at all. The crossing would have remained incomplete. The arrival prevented by the expansion occurring between departure and destination. So there's this narrow band, this threshold region where things transition from observable to unobservable, from reachable to unreachable. Galaxies on one side of that threshold, their light arrives, becomes part of the observable universe, contributes to measurements and catalogs and maps of cosmic structure. Galaxies on the other side, their light doesn't arrive, can't arrive, remains permanently beyond reach, regardless of how long anyone waits or how sensitive the instruments become. The threshold itself is somewhere around 16 billion light-years from here. Maybe 18, the exact distance, depending on how expansion has been changing over cosmic time, how the rate has been evolving. But the general location is, well, it's calculable, based on the expansion rate and the speed of light, and the time available for crossing. The line exists somewhere out there, marking where observation stops being possible, where the geometry prevents any further interaction. And while you're here, resting, time passing quietly, there's no need for this to resolve, no requirement for certainty about what lies beyond that threshold, what exists just beyond that line, just past the point where light stops being able to arrive. That's unclear. There are probably galaxies there, structures similar to the ones observable from here, continuing the same processes, forming stars, evolving over time. The assumption seems reasonable. The universe doesn't suddenly change character right at the boundary, doesn't shift from galaxy-filled to empty, or from structured to chaotic. The same physics likely continues operating. The same processes likely persist. But the probably and likely can't be upgraded to certainty, can't be verified through observation, can't be tested against actual light that actually arrives. The galaxies that might exist there, if they exist, they're separated by a gap that prevents any confirmation. any direct observation, any exchange of light or information that would resolve the uncertainty about their presence or properties. The light from those regions, if it exists, if galaxies there are emitting light the way galaxies here emit light, that light is traveling, has been traveling for billions of years, moving at light speed through expanding space, and it will continue traveling indefinitely, without ever arriving here, without ever crossing into the observable sphere, without ever producing the detection that would confirm the galaxies exist, that would verify the assumption that structures continue beyond the observable horizon. So there's this situation where the most reasonable expectation is that yes, there are galaxies beyond the threshold, continuing the same patterns visible within the observable region. And yet, the expectation can't be confirmed, can't be checked against observation, remains permanently in the category of reasonable inference, maybe, rather than verified fact. The galaxies observable near the edge, the ones whose light barely made it here, they're real, confirmed. Their light arrives and produces measurements and contributes data about their distance, their composition, their motion. The galaxies that might exist just beyond them, sitting a bit farther out, past the threshold where arrival stops being possible. Those remain uncertain, remain in a state where their existence is probable but unverifiable, expected but unconfirmed. And there's no method that changes this, no improvement in technology or theory that upgrades probable to confirmed. That crosses the gap between reasonable expectation and direct observation. The limitation is geometric, built into the rate of expansion itself, into the fact that certain distances create situations where light can't complete the crossing, where observation stops being possible regardless of effort or patience or sophistication of instruments. The hesitation isn't about whether physics continues working beyond the observable horizon, whether the same rules apply, whether galaxies continue forming and evolving. The hesitation is about the difference between expecting something to be the case and having confirmation that it is the case, between inference and observation, between what seems most reasonable and what can actually be verified. The universe beyond the observable horizon might be vastly larger than what's observable, might contain countless more galaxies, might extend infinitely, or might have some boundary or structure that's fundamentally different from anything within the observable region. The most reasonable assumption, based on the uniformity of what can be observed, is that it continues more or less the same, that the structures and processes persist beyond the horizon, just as they persist within it. But the assumption remains something that can't be upgraded to certainty through any measurement, any observation, any signal that crosses from there to here. And while you're sitting here, time passing, the room quiet, the same uncertainty persists, the same threshold continuing to separate observable from unobservable, the same gap between reasonable expectation and actual confirmation, functioning the same way regardless of whether attention stays with this thought or drifts elsewhere, whether the moment continues or settles into something quieter still. The observable universe sits where it sits, containing what it contains, 93 billion light-years from edge to edge, encompassing every galaxy whose light managed to complete the crossing, every structure that can send signals here, every region that can interact with this location in any way, a sphere of visibility. In a sense, though sphere implies something more physical than what's actually there. Beyond that, space keeps going. Probably keeps going anyway. The expansion that prevents light from crossing beyond a certain distance, that doesn't create an edge where things stop. The space likely extends, structures likely form, Galaxies likely go through their processes, all of it occurring beyond the reach of observation, beyond the possibility of confirmation, separated by distances where expansion overtakes light speed. The light from those regions, if it exists, keeps traveling, moving through, expanding space at the speed it always moves, covering distance, making progress away from wherever it started, and the destinations it's aimed at. If destinations exist, they keep receding, pulled along by expansion that accumulates faster than light can cross. So the journey goes on. The motion doesn't stop, and the arrival remains something the geometry prevents. This has been operating for most of cosmic history, the separation between observable and unobservable, the threshold where light stops being able to complete crossings. That's been in place since expansion created horizons, since distances grew large enough for the rate to exceed light speed. And while you're here, wherever you happen to be, time passing quietly, the same processes go on, the same light traveling without arriving, the same expansion creating permanent separations between regions that can't exchange signals or interact in any measurable way. The sphere of visibility stays roughly stable. New light arrives from galaxies within the observable range. Light that left billions of years ago and completed its journey. Light that crosses into detection and becomes part of measurements. The sphere doesn't shrink or grow in any dramatic way, just stays at roughly the same size, containing roughly the same observable region. While the universe beyond keeps expanding, keeps carrying distant regions farther into isolation. Galaxies at the edge, the ones whose light barely made it here. They sent that light billions of years ago, when distances were smaller. The light traveled, crossed the gap, arrived. But as time goes on, as expansion goes on, the light from those galaxies will stop arriving entirely, will stop being able to complete the journey. So the observable universe changes slowly. The sphere stays, contains what it contains, but the specific galaxies it contains shift over cosmic time. Some fading from observability as expansion carries them beyond reach. While nothing new appears to replace them, nothing crosses inward from beyond the horizon. The universe you can see then, it's a small region within something that might be vastly larger. Or maybe not, there's no way to verify, no signal that crosses carrying information about what exists beyond the sphere of visibility. Light keeps traveling from those separated regions, moving through space at the only speed it can move. Indifferent to whether arrival is possible, indifferent to whether the destination is reachable, or forever beyond the geometric limit created by expansion. The photons just move, cover distance, traverse space. And here, where you are, sitting quietly, the room still, time going on without needing anything to change. The same separation stays in place. The light traveling without arriving. The expansion creating permanent boundaries between regions that exist without any possibility of interaction, without any exchange of signals or influence, functioning the same way regardless of attention or awareness. Regardless of whether the thought stays or settles into something quieter still, whether the moment extends or fades, whether anything resolves or simply remains as it is. The journey ongoing, the separation there, the light moving, the space growing, regions existing in isolation, the observable universe containing what it contains, while the rest extends beyond reach, beyond visibility, beyond the possibility of confirmation, and the processes go on. The motion doesn't stop. The waiting extends without resolution, and the thought, if it remains at all, just goes on past any particular ending point.